the Nashville shooter, the trans shooter, Audrey Hale, her parents are going to release the manifesto that has been kept secret by the Nashville police and others. They're going to release that now to the parents of those who were murdered at the Covenant School. And this from the Daily Mail. A lawyer for the parents of Nashville school shooter Audrey Hale said a manifesto found by investigators after the massacre will be handed to the families of students at the school. The pledge, made public during a court hearing on Thursday, comes amid an ongoing legal battle over whether the writings by Hale, who killed 3 children and 3 adults at the Covenant School on March 27th, should be made public. Lawyers for the victims, families, and the school have argued against the release of the so-called manifesto, but others, including some media outlets and national police associations, say it should publish. Hale, 28, a trans man, in other words, a biological woman, a real woman, and former student at the school, detailed how she spent months planning the atrocity. Now, the main argument here for not releasing this manifesto is found in what you just heard from the Daily Mail, which tends to be on the right in many ways, but also it's from the UK, so come on. But within what you just heard is something that I think you need to sharpen your common sense with and not be so quick to believe. We just heard that the families are the one that are really standing in the way of the manifesto being released because it could re-traumatize some of these families that are still trying to recover from the death of their loved ones, and it could create a blueprint for future killers. Now, calling me skeptical, but I would believe that, sure, there may be some family members that don't want this released, but by and large, the vast majority of people do want it released because it contains information that is vital for us to hear. But if you read that Daily Mail article, you would think it's just these external third-party organizations that want it released, but not necessarily these families. And now, calling me skeptical, but I think that there are plenty of people among the group of these Nashville families that do want this released, and for good reason. So let me respond to some of the objections here. There are some that say it's a blueprint for future people who want to do these kind of shootings in the future. So we don't want to kind of continue to stoke this kind of animosity, so why reveal it? Well, I'll tell you this. It's a blueprint, all right. It's a blueprint for how leftist ideology is ruining people's lives. The real reason they don't want this thing released is that very many people, predominantly those on the left I'm speaking about here, they don't want you to know that trans people are suffering deeply from mental illness. They're suffering deeply from the ideology that is, even if you wouldn't classify it as mental illness, because I think we need to be careful about this. It exposes how the mainstream media and the modern day left are exacerbating an ideology that is very damaging to people. Now, let me just preface real quick before I read an article to you. The reason I am cautious about ascribing mental illness to people is that if there is a logical basis by which you are saying that some of these acts of atrocity should take place, then is it really mental illness? Let me give you the example here. So most people would not say that Hitler was mentally ill. They would say that he is evil. Why? Because they don't want to take agency away from Hitler. They want him to be fully responsible for what he did to Jews. They don't want to give him any out whatsoever. Now, aren't we doing that to a group of people who, yes, are struggling with some mentally debilitating lies, but a group of people who have been told by the mainstream media and other outlets and continue to speak amongst themselves that if anybody doesn't say your gender pronouns, or if anybody doesn't respect the fact that you think you're a woman trapped in a man's body, then ultimately they're committing genocide against you. Well, see, the logical conclusion there is that if there's somebody that wants to commit genocide against you and a group of your friends, well, then you would best defend yourself. This is the implicit acknowledgement. And so ultimately, all we've done with the trans movement in America is to exacerbate a false ideology that deeply damages the psyche of people. And that is found in this quote from Ellen Page, who now goes by Elliot Page and believes herself to be a man. Now, of course, if you remember who Ellen Page is, she is the actor from things like the Umbrella Academy and other films like Juno. Now, you may remember her and you may not, but she just recently released a book called Page Boy. In it, she gives some harrowing tales about what has happened to her since since her transition and before that. Now, this is from an article from the LA Times, but she goes into detail in the book about this instance. But this is a moment before she decided that she was actually a man. This is the incident that took place in her life prior to that. And it says this, quote, "Alone in the stillness, Paige started to crack. All of the self-hatred now forgive me, this is obviously LA Times, it's really she, but he'd been pushing down for years. The discomfort he felt in his body, the anger toward those who'd told him to repress his identity, spelled out. One night he tried to knock himself out, took his knuckles to his face and punched over and over until bruises formed. For days after, he sat in a lawn chair on the porch, ashamed, his face sore, and then he heard a voice. You don't have to feel this way. It was a small voice, barely discernible, but it kept echoing in his head, a way out. It was as if something in my brain turned around," recalls Paige, now 36. "The agonizing voice saying, 'No, you're not. No, you can't,' just switched and became very gentle and loving. Oh, maybe I'm trans. Why don't I explore that?" Within weeks, he scheduled a Zoom consultation with a doctor to discuss top surgery. So let's just get this really clear for the record, according to Ellen Page herself. She beat herself senseless in her own face until she was sore and then started hearing voices in her head, and she obeyed those voices, and that's what caused her to perform her trans surgeries. So forgive me for recognizing the obvious here, but these people are suffering greatly. The release of this manifesto will only detail that even further, and that is a potential reason why the left and those in power don't want this manifesto to be released, because it will tell you the truth about transgenderism and how it is impacting people in such a negative and harmful way. Now, the second reason is this, is they don't want you to know that the trans community is suffering mentally in this country, and it's being exacerbated by the conversations that liberals and leftists are having about the issue. But they also don't want you to know that as a result of the way this group of people is suffering mentally, they are also deeply violent. Now, a couple of arguments here. If these people would chop up their own body, you know, the thing that you're supposed to love, the thing that you're supposed to care about more so than maybe even other people's body, if they would do this to themselves, why wouldn't they do it to you? Why wouldn't they do it to yours? See, this inability to understand the sanctity of life is deeply troubling for all of us, and this is seen in the trans movement consistently. The Nashville shooter is not the first trans terrorist to go take a gun and try to kill people. Of course, this has happened before. I'm not saying that everybody who's trans is going to take up a gun and is innately violent. I am just saying that the ideology of transgenderism is a violent ideology. Now, to boot, as I've expressed before, that we have a media and political class who is exacerbating this issue. 3 days after the shooting, Biden announced that it would be Trans Day of Visibility. And then one day after Trans Day of Visibility, and only 4 days after the trans activist that shot and killed all those people in Nashville, there was a planned day of vengeance by the trans community. Now, there was a lot of hubbub online. Hubbub, that's a ridiculous word. Nonetheless, there's a lot of commotion online about what that day would actually look like. Was there really going to be vengeance so shortly after what took place in Nashville? And why were these people calling for vengeance in the first place? So, according to one of the activists on Twitter that I believe was responsible for coordinating this day, had this to say about Trans Day of Vengeance. Quote, Trans Day of Vengeance has long been a trans community meme meant to exercise frustration with the way the rest of society constantly tramples on us. It's not a call for violence, end quote. Now, so the obvious implication here is that we're just using it kind of euphemistically. Vengeance doesn't actually mean vengeance, even though this is on the heels of a Nashville shooter killing 6 people that was a trans activist. What we mean when we say vengeance is not violence. We just mean airing out our frustrations. And so what was planned was on the steps of the Supreme Court, there would be a group of trans activists that would join with other people that day and would have their day of vengeance. What that would look like, we'll never quite know, because not only were the tweets taken down by Twitter because they were an incitement of violence, actually, unlike January 6th, but also because this community thought that they needed to protect themselves from everybody else. They can't have a trans day of vengeance even in peace. They can't go around hurting other people in peace because others had issues with this and they started getting a bunch of hate comments on Twitter. So in response to this same person who helped coordinate this event replied to someone on Twitter, and this is what they had to say. So I want you to hear it in their own words. Quote, "We came up with Trans Day of Visibility because it's a double-edged sword. Some of us said, we don't need visibility, we need vengeance. But if you read it as trans people seeking vengeance in a violent way, do you think it might be violence we are responding to?" In other words, and I love this, we would never have a Trans Day of Vengeance. But if we did, it would be because people are trying to hurt us. And of course, we're just protecting ourselves. But again, we would never have a real day of trans vengeance and create violence. But again, if we did, we would be justified in doing that, right? So this is the playbook of the left over and over again. This isn't happening. But if it is happening, it's really good that it's happening. And then, yeah, it's kind of happening, but not a whole lot. I mean, it's a little bit happening. And then, yep, it's happening. It's really good that it's happening. And we're going to celebrate it and do it as much as we possibly can. So all I can say in summation to all of this is that I think the manifesto should be released, because I think it's time to be honest with people, as honest as we possibly can. Because honesty and truth should be seen, especially in a world of lies, as a supreme act of compassion. So you just got done watching a small excerpt of a much larger episode. You can find the link to that full episode down below in the description of this video. So you definitely want to check that out, because if you like that clip, you'll like the much larger episode. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click that little bell to be notified when great new episodes of Indie Thinker come your way. Thanks for watching.